Today we are looking at the story, Just a Bunch of Rocks and Bones. And when we look at the story, we need to look about it through the point of view. Remember, we have two types of points of view. One is called first-person points of view, and that's written through the narrator's eyes and how the narrator thinks or feels. Oftentimes you see the word I or me. There's also a third-person point of view, and when we look at third-person point of view, that is through the characters in the story, and outside, the narrator is outside the story. The narrator is not taking place within the story. Today we will read this realistic fiction. First, we will read to understand what the story is about. Then, on your own, you will reread it to determine whether the story is first or third-person point of view. Go ahead now with your group and make sure that you have identified some of the text features you see in this passage. Go. Okay, so we have an illustration in the top corner of what looks like dinosaur bones, and we have closed reader habits at the bottom. The closed reader habit says different words signal different types of narration. Underline the words and signal who is telling the story. We're going to look at question number 1. Who is the narrator? Question number 2. How does a story use first-person or third-person narration? Explain your thinking to include evidence that supports it. So we are going to have to make sure that when we're talking and thinking, we are using our evidence to support, which means backs up our claim. Number 3. How does LeBron's point of view about the museum change from the beginning of the story to the end, and why? So we're going to have to look at a couple different pieces. Beginning of the story, and we're going to have to look at the end of the story. And of course, support it with details that tell us why. Number 4 says, how would the story be different if it was told by a narrator with a different point of view? Why would it be different? List some story details that might change. Alright, so let's go ahead and start reading, and you are going to read it with me this time. We're going to answer the questions, then you will reread it for understanding, and number 5 will be your homework. Just a bunch of rocks and bones. I was looking forward to my first field trip at my new school. We were scheduled to visit the Museum of Natural History, which sounded extremely interesting to me. That is, until my new friend Barry started complaining about it. As our bus traveled along the highway, Barry insisted, I'm telling you, LeBron, we went last year and it's mostly just a bunch of boring rocks and bones. What a snoozer. Oh no, I thought. There's nothing worse than being bored, especially when I was really looking forward to something. Suddenly, the trip seemed ruined. Moments later, our bus pulled into the museum parking lot. We dragged ourselves outside and trudged up the museum steps. Sweating under the hot sun, I glumly looked around. Then I noticed a statue of a small, perky dinosaur poking its head out of some bushes. Hey, I thought, this might not be so bad. Our tour guide met us and shepherded our class to the museum. Barry was right in one way. There was a lot of rocks and bones, but what rocks? We viewed cool fossils of creatures that had lived millions of years ago. We also saw sparkling gemstones and meteors that had fallen from space, and the bones were even better. One gallery featured skeletons of mastodons and saber-toothed cat. Another displayed dinosaurs, including part of a T-Rex. Already I was hoping we'd come back to see more next year, but I don't think I'm ready to tell Barry that. Alright, with your group now, I'd like you to go back and find key words that show us, is this a first-person point of view, or is this a third-person point of view? Go. Okay, so hopefully you found some keywords that tells us if it was first-person point of view. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in paragraph 1. 9 clue words, and those include I, my, we, me, our, I'm. So those are all clue words that tells us what type of story this is. I'm going to move this box over to answer our first question. The narrator is LeBron. So in your story, I'd like you to write, the narrator is LeBron, to answer our first question. The second question, does this story use first-person or third-person narration? Explain, including details to support it. Well, this story is a first-person story. This story is written in the first-person narration. I'd like you to go with your group now and find one detail that tells you this is a first-person narration. Go. Okay, so hopefully you found one interesting piece of evidence to support your answer to number 2. One piece of evidence that I found is the narrator, LeBron, is a character in the story. And LeBron uses words such as I, my, we, and our, and these pronouns signal first word narration. They're kind of like little clues. Please write down your evidence in question 2. Okay. So something I wrote here again to restate our findings, this story is written in first-person narration. I know this because the narrator, LeBron, is a character in the story. LeBron uses words such as I, my, we, and our, and these pronouns signal first-person narration. Moving on to question number 3. How does LeBron's point of view about the museum change from the beginning to the middle to the end of the story, and why? So I made a chart here about beginning, middle, and end. So on your question number 3, please write the words beginning, middle, and end. In the beginning, LeBron looks forward to seeing the museum Tell your neighbor now, what happened in the middle of the story? When you are done sharing your thoughts with your neighbor, go ahead and write down how LeBron's view of the middle of the story changed and what was it? Okay, so in the middle of this story, he becomes worried that he will be bored during the trip. And lastly, at the end of the story, LeBron enjoys the museum. One detail is it says, I was already hoping we'd come back to see more next year. So I'm going to add that evidence into my answer. I was hoping we'd come back to see more next year. Okay, we're going to move on now to question number 4. Question number 4 says, how would the story be different if it was told by a narrator with a different point of view? Why would it be different? List some story details that might change. Go ahead now and talk to your neighbor about this question for about 2.5 minutes. Go. Okay, so hopefully you got some good details working with your neighbor. Remember, if this story were told by a third-person narrator, we might not know Barry's thoughts. In paragraphs 2 and 3 and 4, it tells us what he's thinking. And if it was told through a third-person point of view, we might not know that. When it was told through a third-person point of view, it might be different because Barry gives us a lot of insight about what he was feeling. For example, we might learn that Barry hates the museum when Barry told LeBron the museum was just a bunch of rocks. Third-person narration might have added more information about Barry's thoughts. It could have been something like, Barry hated looking at rock after rock without knowing what made them special or different. Because in this story, Barry's actions are very different than his thoughts and the things that we learn from inside his head. Go ahead now and save your answers for number 5 in your head or write down some notes, and your homework today is to complete question number 5.